Well, I'm going to 10. Which one do you want to go to?
The roof floor is the party going on.
All right.
That time of night.
So it's that time.
Great, I'm Sandeep.
Sandeep.
Yeah,
Nice to meet
from
you.
Claire.health.
Okay.
You're a doctor, right?
Play one on TV.
That's good. So let me ask you something. Ever play phone tag with your patients, or like maybe on your staff, they're playing phone tag with patients, trying to get a hold of them?
Yeah.
Sucks,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's always time.
Well, it sucks on the patient side as well when they're playing phone tag.
Yeah.
Right? So, imagine if you were a nurse at a surgery center.
Mm-hmm.
They play phone tag with about 50 patients every day,
Okay.
right? And then they're trying to coordinate all this with everybody in their crew. And if you miss somebody, that's a canceled surgery. That's a big problem, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So that's the problem we're trying to solve with smart text messaging and chatbots. So basically, there's no phone tags. Patients can answer questions about their surgery at their own time. The nurse's job sucks a lot less, and there's a lot less surgery cancellations. The trick is knowing what to ask and how to ask it, and also trying to focus on patients who need the most help. And that's really our secret sauce. So this is something we're actually rolling out at one surgery center right now. And we're going after a target market of about 5,000 surgery centers initially. And at this point, we're looking for grant funding or seed funding to get this thing rolling.
Yeah.
And then
So yeah, like before we get to that, because that makes sense. I'm just curious around when a nurse is reaching out to a patient, what kind of questions are they trying to get answered?
Yeah, so actually, so one of our team members is a medical director at a surgery center, and turns out there's a wealth of information that goes there, which depending on the surgery type, the patient's body weight, and there's so many different variables that goes in there to figure out what questions to ask. And literally there's this call script that's also aided with a lot of clinical knowledge base, if you will. And that basically constitutes what you're going to ask. And based on what answers come in, then there's follow-up questions that you would ask to figure out if this patient do they need to go get a sleep apnea consultation, or if they need to get an EKG taken, or something that they need to do before they show up for the surgery.
So basically you're taking that synchronous sort of communication and making it asynchronous, right?
Yeah, somewhat. So also kind of getting the nurse away from making all those phone calls, right? So if you can do this, let's say online or with a chatbot, I can ask the same question and kind of do the screening automated. The nurse has to call a lot less. She can only focus, or he can only focus on the patients who actually are more complex cases that do require one-to-one interaction, right? So the good portion of people, they may just answer these questions and it turns out, hey, you're okay for surgery, just show up on the day and don't need anything in the morning. And you
so this is like the questions they're asking. So I think we need to nail down specifically. The questions they're asking are like, have you been NPO type thing, or have you done your prep work, or have you what kind of questions?
Yeah, so according to my medical director friends, like are you 65 or older? What's your body weight? Is your BMI okay for surgery?
That threw me for a loop. Sure. So they're getting screened for surgery.
Yes.
But we don't know that they're 65 or older already?
Yeah, so it turns out what happens, this actually kind of threw me off as well when I first discovered it. Okay. So surgery centers, they're just like, providing the space for folks to come and perform the surgery.
Right.
So surgery center gets all their patients from doctors who are scheduling surgery saying, hey, I'm going to perform surgery on this patient at this surgery center because I have a booked slot, right? Book them time. And so surgery center, all they know at that point is patient so-and-so for doctor so-and-so operate on Friday at 3 p.m. And so now the onus is on the surgery center to go call the patient, figure out that they're actually okay for the surgery. And this is what we found out talking to a lot of surgery centers. This is where the nurse is spending a lot of time, right? Because all that information, unfortunately, does not get from the doctor's office to the surgery center.
So this sounds like a silly question maybe, but why, wouldn't there be benefit in kind of trying to get the information, at least as much of it as you can, from the doctor that's already kind of decided that this patient, and so rather than, there's a kind of reinventing the wheel part that we're...
Logically, yes.
Okay.
Then you're talking in the EHR to EHR sort of integration, right? Yeah. So from a business proposition perspective, you're now looking at a much higher ramp-up time, right? Because I need to connect multiple EHRs together to get this thing flowing, right? So, but the thing you can do is, since these, the practical problem at hand is, since these nurses are already making these phone calls, and in fact, it's an expensive problem.
Totally.
It's like somewhere around the neighborhood of $17,000 a month to pay a nurse full-time to make these calls,
Yeah.
while she could be doing other more
Nurse
things
life.
that are
Sure.
more to her skill sets. So, so it's basically about getting these questions down to a point where it's really automated, and have nurses call a lot less.
Okay. Okay.
And then the other thing also about compliance, right? Because like I said, if you miss any of these patients, it's a canceled surgery, and that's what we're really trying to avoid is to call up
Because they haven't been screened appropriately.
yes, or they show up for the surgery unprepared. They should have gotten an EKG done. They should have gotten a sleep apnea consult done, and they didn't do that because we missed it somehow, right? And so now it's a canceled surgery. That's expensive for the surgery center. So that's a very, very expensive problem. So compliance-wise, also this helps. And then I think over time there's also, machine learning implications here. Like, how do we ask this question better to get to?
So I think there's real benefit if you want to. Maybe the first rollout could be kind of taking this like low step of kind of getting the nurses off the phone, but then also then finding a way to coordinate with the doctor's office that's already kind of aggregated all this. Ideally aggregated all this information, and they might know, like, okay, you need this sleep apnea consult, an EKG, whatever else.
And then also you need to verify sometimes what's in the EHR as well, right? So that's it. So the call is going to be there. We just need to, reduce the number of calls that get made.
Sure.
So, like I said, we're looking for some, seed funding or grants. And then also we're trying to talk to as many surgery centers as possible. So do you mind if I follow up with you to see if you know somebody or if you might be able to help?
I know a few surgeons surgeons are now at surgery centers, kind of run their own space, but maybe, yeah.
Okay. Well, if you have a card on you, I'd love to take it and bug you some of the time.
I will get you one when I get on this elevator.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Any questions for Sandeep? Yeah.
Somebody's got to ask these questions. Great pitch. You were talking about certain surgeries. Have you done any market research to find if more value-based like hip replacements or knee replacements are easier to sort of target as your niche market, or did you find that other types of surgeries were a little bit more difficult to prepare for, open heart surgery or something more complicated? And if so, are you going to more focus on those or just try to focus on all surgeries?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at this point for us, it's really about data collection as to what would be the best way to scale this. But also I'm going by the principle of, build a prototype for one and then try to engineer it for a max scale. So we're fortunate that we have access to one surgery center. It's an outpatient surgery center. And so we're looking at the types of cases that they get most or is the most valuable for them. And so from there, build a skeleton of how to, solve the problem for them in a meaningful manner that's valuable. And so yeah, certain types of surgery do jump out at this particular surgery center. Also, that was interesting was that certain doctors do jump out because their cases are more, problematic to process for the nurses than others. So having all this sort of intelligence, some of it's just folklore that you or institutional expertise that comes by being at that place for a long time. How do you institutionalize that? Because it turns out at this place, anytime they get a new nurse, they don't know this, and to train them all these little nuances that, hey, when Dr. So-and-so scheduled the surgery, watch out because they don't collect all that data, right? And so those you need to call a lot far ahead than this doctor who's already in our system and so forth. So these are the type of little things that, it's for tech, like code, it's so easy to put those rules or knowledge base. But the amount of impact you have on nursing is great. So to your point, yeah, certain surgeries are going to stand out. And so building a deeper knowledge base about that particular surgery type and the different nuances, things go wrong, all right, and then being able to screen that in an automated fashion, that's where we see a lot of value. And then scale that out to different types of surgeries over time.
So I think, could I jump on one thing that Eric said? I think that you said something really interesting, and this is one of the things that I think about really understanding. So when I teach design and how it works in the healthcare space, one of the really critical things that is important is really understanding the problem. And so rather than the specific doctor or the surgery center, there might be certain patients or patient types that respond better to this kind of interface, and then you could maybe map that to certain types of surgeries, like hip replacements tend to be older patients, like so, and in that demographic, if you look at that user, how would they interface with this? Do they want the reassurance? See, going back to what we were saying with the nurse, it's like there's something wonderfully reassuring about being on the phone with a human being, especially if you're going to surgery. You're putting your life in someone's hands. And so I want that touch point. And there's some people that may not need it, right? Some people that are more, like, I'm going to generalize, and this may not be true, because but a younger, more tech-savvy crowd might not need that in that same way, or might be able to get that sort of.
My mom would take offense to that.
Yeah, just what, broad generalization, there's no data behind what I said.
No, but you're
No
absolutely
offense.
right. The other thing is also about the medium itself, right? So, I mean, right now we're fiddling around with text messaging and chatbots and so forth, but because voice-activated interfaces like Alexa, are they any better, right? I know it's not about compliance, but there's a whole swath of, I think, interfaces to explore, right? How far can you go with robocalls if they sound realistic enough, right? So I think all those nuances are to be explored, and fortunately one of our team members is also a design expert, and she's been actually talking to nurses to figure out their part of the experience, and the next bit is of course talk to the patients to see what we'd fly, because at the end of the day, if we're not making an impact in the experience, then nothing else sort of matters.
Sandeep, all this discussion has just sort of put an idea in my head. It may not be applicable, but what about simpler procedures like colonoscopies, where you again don't want, because I was thinking this whole thing about cancellations, and what you need to ask patients before they come in is, did you fast? Did you take the diet, whatever, all that stuff, horrendous things you got to take to empty yourself out? Because if they don't, then they might as well not show up, and they can reschedule like the whole flow. And the interesting thing about that sort of goes to the point you were just speaking of, is it's a much more routine procedure, so you don't need as many sort of touch points. So you might think about it.
Yeah, no. So to that point, one thing in our research we found is that somebody told us that, hey, Epic already does this. They already have the questions in Epic. Why are you doing this, right? And we looked at it. Epic does have all the questions. In fact, it's 2 screens worth of questions. And so what we found is that the nurses, when they make the call, they have Epic in front of them, and they have all these questions which perhaps normal human being would understand. So the nurse is doing the translation in her head to make it more relevant to the patient, and the sequence is different. She asks the money questions first, because she knows if I can ask these 4 or 5 questions first and get the answer, I don't need to ask the rest, because they already need to go see somebody at that point, right? So there's a way. That's why I said, like, really the key here is like, what do you ask and how you ask it and what sequence. And so the expertise we have in our team, like the medical director who's worked at the surgery center and access to the nurses, that's really the knowledge base is going to be, is like, how do you get to the money questions first? And it's all about efficiency then.
Great presentation. Obviously, I've talked to you before. I love you and I love your idea. The thing that concerns me as a clinician, looking at this from a clinical standpoint, is perioperative risk is a very serious deal. And questionnaires, whether it's paper questionnaires, I mean, we've all been in clinical settings where our doctor gives us a form to fill out ahead of time. The tricky thing is whether you're doing it as a paper form or you're doing it as a text-based or whatever, is and there's been studies to this, that patient reporting on questionnaires, there's a lot of holes in those, because patients don't understand what CAD is, coronary artery disease, or history of MI. They may say, I've never had an MI, but I've had a heart attack. And so, things like that. And so it's really critical, because if you're doing an app like this, and someone says no, and they screen out for getting that EKG, that's liability. So the benefit to a human being is that the nurse has the heuristic to know how to ask that question, and they get a sense from the patient on the phone. So that makes me a little uneasy just thinking about risk. Perioperative risk is a really serious thing.
No, absolutely. And I think that the core value or IP, whatever you want to call it, the asset is, how do we phrase those questions? How close can we get to the doctors and nurses who are asking these questions? Because if we're not there, then this is not going to be as successful, right? So a lot of this is taking all that, the clinical aspect of what questions or what data needs to be collected, and then how do you phrase it? How do you sort of gauge the emotion of the person who's taking So also, and how much can tech do? And just really pushing the boundaries there. And I would believe with all the advent we're seeing in these, smart interfaces, glass, voice, chatbots all included, that I believe that we should be able to get there. But you're totally right. I think that's the aspiration, that's where we have to be to make it work.
Great, thank you, Sandeep.
I